It's 5:47 in the morning. I shuffle outside in my work boots, coffee mug in hand. And my driveway? Empty. 4 vehicles, vanished overnight like ghosts. No warning sticker, no notice on my door. Just 4 empty patches of concrete staring back at me in the cold morning air. I find the notice taped to my mailbox, signed by Darlene Fitch. At the bottom, in her own handwriting,
"Standards exist for a reason, Mr. Tillman."
What Darlene didn't know, what she never bothered to find out, is that I'm the owner of the largest towing company in this county. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And Darlene Fitch was about to win the mother of all prizes. What would you do if you woke up to every car gone from your driveway? And where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one travels. My name is Garrett Tillman, and I have lived in the Pinebrook Estates subdivision outside of Murfreesboro, Tennessee for 11 years. I know every crack and every sidewalk on this street. I've helped 4 neighbors move furniture, fixed 2 fences after the same storm, and organized the 4th of July block cookout every single summer since 2013. This isn't just a house to me. It's where my kids learned to ride bikes, where my wife Rhonda planted her garden along the back fence, where I park the trucks I've worked my whole adult life to afford. Now let me tell you about the business. Tillman Brothers Towing started with 1 beat-up flatbed and a phone number printed on a magnetic sign. Me and my older brother Clyde, working nights and weekends out of a gravel lot we rented for $300 a month. 20 years later, Tillman Brothers has a fleet of 19 trucks, contracts with 2 counties and a major roadside assistance provider, and a dispatch center staffed around the clock. It's not glamorous. It smells like diesel and rust and the particular kind of patience you need to deal with panicked strangers on the side of the highway at 2 a.m. But it's ours. Pinebrook Estates is one of those HOA communities that sold itself on the promise of neighborhood standards, painted mailboxes, approved mulch colors, lawn height requirements that I am not making up, 2 to 4 inches measured quarterly, fine structure for violations, the whole enchilada. For the first 8 years, I barely noticed the HOA existed. Pay dues, mow the lawn, go about your life. The board changed hands the way these things do. Mostly quiet people who just wanted to make sure nobody painted their shutters neon orange. Then, Darlene Fitch ran for HOA president. Darlene is a retired school vice principal, which I say not to insult educators, but to explain the specific brand of authority she brought to the role. Maximum paperwork, minimum grace, and the unwavering conviction that rules exist primarily as instruments of control over people she personally disapproves of. She moved into Pinebrook 4 years ago and immediately began cataloging violations. Her first act as president was commissioning a formal curb appeal audit of every home on the street. Mine failed. For what, you ask? A basketball hoop in the driveway. Portable, the kind every kid on the block uses. Recreational equipment visible from the street is prohibited per Section 4, Clause 9 of the Pinebrook CC and Rs, she informed me by certified letter. I moved the hoop to the backyard. No big deal. But Darlene wasn't finished. She never was. The trucks were next. I sometimes park a personal pickup, not a commercial vehicle, just a big crew cab F350, in my driveway when my fleet vehicles are at the lot. Darlene argued it constituted a commercial vehicle in a residential zone because it had my company name and logo on the door. I pointed out that dozens of neighbors had logos on their vehicles. Plumbing vans, delivery trucks, contractor pickups. Nobody else got a letter, just me, just the black man with the towing company. I want to be careful about this because I'm not the type to throw accusations around without evidence. But when your white neighbor 3 houses down parks his landscaping trailer in the driveway for 2 solid weeks and gets nothing, while you get a certified letter for a logoed personal truck parked on your own property for 3 hours on a Saturday, the math starts to do itself. I hired an attorney. I documented everything. I appealed the ruling. The board voted 4-1 in Darlene's favor. That one dissenting vote was a retired firefighter named Boyd Kellerman, who pulled me aside after the meeting and said, quietly, "This isn't over, and I don't like where it's heading." He was right. It wasn't over. It was barely getting started. The vehicle war escalated over the next 6 months in a pattern so textbook it almost felt choreographed. First, Darlene pushed through an amendment to the Pinebrook CC and Rs, the governing document that every homeowner agrees to when they buy in the neighborhood. The amendment, passed in a meeting with 11 of the 42 homeowners present, redefined commercial vehicle to include any personal vehicle bearing a business logo larger than 16 square inches. 16 square inches, that's about the size of a paperback novel. My truck's door decal, 48 square inches. Cited. Fined $50 per day. I appealed. Denied. I paid the fines under protest, while my attorney, a sharp woman named Constance Okafor, began building what she called a procedural challenge, arguing the amendment was passed without proper quorum and without the required 30-day notice period specified in the CC and Rs themselves. Darlene's countermove. She hired a process server to deliver a formal nuisance and violation notice to my door on a Tuesday evening when she knew, based on neighborhood gossip, that I had family visiting. The smell of my mother-in-law's slow cooker pot roast was still in the air, that warm paprika and onion smell that fills the whole house. When Rhonda opened the door to a stranger in a polo shirt, handing over a manila envelope. 52 violations, some dating back 3 years, mostly parking related, a few for aesthetic non-compliance. My shutters were borderline out of range on the approved color chart, allegedly. One, I am not making this up, cited me for excessive truck engine noise for starting my vehicle before 7 a.m. on 4 separate occasions. The total alleged fines? $6,200. Now here's where most people would panic, and honestly, I had a moment, standing in my kitchen reading that document while my mother-in-law pretended not to see, where I felt a cold, sick weight in my chest. Because that's what these things are designed to do. They're not really about shutters or parking. They're about making you feel like a guest in your own home. Like the walls might close in if you breathe wrong. Then I did what I always do when I feel that weight. I drove to the lot, walked through my shop, listened to the sound of the compressors running and the radio in the back office playing old country. And I remembered that I built this, that nobody handed it to me, that I had been underestimated before. The crunch of gravel under my boots in that lot has a particular sound, thick and deliberate, like it means business. And by the time I'd made one lap around the yard, I wasn't scared anymore. I was thinking. My counterattack. I started documenting every single violation across the neighborhood that Darlene was not citing. I bought a decent camera. I drove slowly through Pinebrook on my days off and cataloged. An RV parked in a side driveway for weeks, not cited. A boat trailer visible from the street, not cited. A commercial HVAC van parked in front of a house 3 nights running, not cited. Each photo was time-stamped. Each was cross-referenced against the CC and Rs. Within 6 weeks, I had documented 31 instances of apparent violations by other homeowners that had received no action from the HOA. I organized them by address, by date, and by the specific clause they appeared to violate. Constance reviewed the stack and let out a slow whistle. "This is selective enforcement," she said. "In an HOA context, that's legally significant. If they can show a pattern of enforcing rules against some homeowners while ignoring the same violations by others, it weakens the enforceability of their fines and opens them up to a discrimination claim under the Fair Housing Act." The Fair Housing Act. That's the federal law. 42 U.S.C. Section 3604, for the Googlers among you, that prohibits housing discrimination based on race, among other protected classes. HOAs are not exempt. Selective HOA enforcement, where rules are applied against some residents but not others in a pattern that correlates with race, can constitute a Fair Housing Act violation. Document everything. I sent Darlene's board a letter through Constance, polite, professional, ice cold in its specificity, noting the discrepancy and requesting equal enforcement across all properties. I CC'd the Tennessee Human Rights Commission for good measure. Darlene's response arrived 4 days later. She didn't address a single one of my documented violations. Instead, she sent a neighborhood-wide email calling on residents to report ongoing commercial activity in residential properties and suggesting that certain homeowners were operating unlicensed businesses from the neighborhood. My towing company operates from a commercial lot 3 miles away, has for 20 years, licensed, permitted, bonded, inspected. Every box checked, every year. She knew that. She sent the email anyway. If segment 1 was about property rules, segment 2 was about money, and about who blinks first when it starts to hurt. Darlene escalated to what HOA boards call lien proceedings. This is the nuclear option in the HOA arsenal. If fines go unpaid long enough, the board can place a lien on your property. Depending on state law, a lien can ultimately, eventually, through a long legal process, lead to foreclosure. In Tennessee, HOA lien law requires that fines be properly documented, notices properly served, and that the HOA follow specific procedural steps. Most HOA boards count on homeowners not knowing any of this. They count on people just paying to make it stop. I didn't pay. Constance filed a formal challenge to the lien, citing procedural defects in the way the violation notices had been served and the way the board's amendment had been passed without proper quorum. She also filed a complaint with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, formally alleging a pattern of racially disparate enforcement. The THRC complaint did something interesting. It made Darlene nervous in a way the legal filings hadn't. Because a Human Rights Commission complaint is public record once it moves past initial review. And public records have a way of turning up in local news. The Murfreesboro Tribune runs a weekly column called Neighbor Matters. It's mostly lost dogs and zoning disputes, but the reporter who covers it, a young woman named Philippa Strand, fresh out of MTSU's journalism program, had been tipped by Boyd Kellerman that something was brewing in Pinebrook. Philippa knocked on my door on a Wednesday afternoon, and I invited her in for coffee. I told her the whole story. I showed her the violation notices. I showed her the 31 property documentation I'd given to Constance. I did not ask her to write anything. I just laid out the facts and let her decide. The article ran that Sunday. Pinebrook Estates homeowner alleges selective enforcement, files rights complaint. Above the fold. Online, it got 400 shares by Monday morning, which is basically viral by small-town Tennessee newspaper standards. Darlene's response was to call an emergency board meeting and vote to increase my monthly fines to $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the original lien filing. She also sent a letter to my commercial insurance provider, claiming that I was operating a commercial towing business from a residential address, a flat lie, apparently hoping to trigger a rate review or policy flag. My insurance agent, a man named Walt Pruitt, who has known me for 15 years, called me within an hour of receiving the letter. "Garrett," he said, "someone just tried to get you in trouble with me. I thought you'd want to know." He sent a formal letter back to Darlene's board, confirming that Tillman Brothers Towing operates from a properly licensed commercial address and that no investigation was warranted. One swing, one miss. But the fines were piling up on paper, and Darlene knew that the lien, even if ultimately overturned, would cloud my title and make refinancing or sale complicated in the short term. She was playing a war of attrition. Run up the legal costs, tie up the property, make it easier to just pay and be done. What she didn't know, what I had been quietly preparing since the day Constance told me about selective enforcement, was that I had been running a parallel investigation into the HOA's own finances. HOA financial records in Tennessee are required to be made available to members upon written request. It's in the state's Nonprofit Corporation Act, under which most HOAs are organized. I submitted a formal records request for the past 4 years of HOA financials, bank statements, vendor contracts, meeting minutes, and disbursement records. They stalled for 6 weeks. Then they produced a partial set of records, incomplete, missing 2 full years of bank statements. Tennessee Code Annotated, Section 66-27-502, requires HOAs to maintain and provide members access to financial records. Refusal or delay can be grounds for a court order compelling disclosure. Constance went to court. The judge ordered full disclosure within 10 business days. What arrived in that banker's box of records was not what Darlene intended to hand over. I don't think she'd read them closely herself, but Constance did, with a yellow highlighter and 17 sticky notes. And what she found made the parking violations look like a rounding error. Let me tell you what power looks like when it starts to feel threatened. It doesn't retreat. It doubles down, gets sloppy, and starts making mistakes. While Constance was working through those financial records, Darlene made a move I didn't anticipate. She went after my son. Marcus is 21. He's finishing his associate's degree in business administration and works part-time at the shop, mostly dispatching on weekends. He drives a 2009 Honda Civic he bought himself with money he saved over 2 summers. It had a Tillman Brothers bumper sticker on the back, the small oval kind, maybe 4 inches wide. Under Darlene's redefined CC and Rs, a bumper sticker is not a door logo, and a bumper sticker had never been cited before. Until it was. Marcus got a violation notice in his name. The sticker, the board argued, constituted commercial signage. Fine. $50 per day. Marcus called me from the driveway, his voice controlled in a way that told me he was working hard to keep it that way. I drove over. I looked at the notice. I stood there in the thin autumn sunlight, smelling the dry leaf and coming rain smell of October in Middle Tennessee, and I told my son, "Don't peel the sticker, don't move the car, don't pay a dime. We're going to handle this the right way." He nodded. Then he said, "Dad, is this about the company or is it about us?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer is both, and he already knew it. I filed an emergency petition with the Rutherford County Circuit Court, arguing that extending violations to a car owned by a third party, Marcus is not on the deed to my house, for a 4-inch bumper sticker was facially absurd, procedurally defective, and designed to harass. The judge agreed within 48 hours and issued a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from pursuing fines related to that vehicle. Score: Garrett 1, Darlene 0. But she wasn't done. She organized what she called a community safety walk, basically a tour of the neighborhood, led by herself and 2 board members, during which they photographed properties and issued same-day violation notices. My property got 11 new violations in a single afternoon. Crack in the driveway edge, downspout positioned non-conformally, a garden statue in the front bed that Rhonda had put out 3 years ago without any prior objection. The statue is a concrete rabbit, about 8 inches tall. Decorative objects not pre-approved by the Aesthetics Committee are prohibited per Section 7, Clause 2. I'm going to say that again. They cited us for a concrete rabbit. Here's the thing about petty authority. It always overreaches. Every time. Because petty authority isn't actually about rules, it's about dominance. And dominance, when challenged, always escalates. Darlene had convinced herself that if she piled on enough violations, enough fines, enough legal noise, I'd eventually get tired or scared or both and fold. What she hadn't considered is that I run a business where I get called out at 3 a.m. in ice storms, where I've pulled people out of ditches on the interstate, where I've dealt with every kind of difficult human being the state of Tennessee has to offer. I don't fold easy, and I was about to start using her own playbook against her. I submitted my own formal complaint to the HOA board, citing 12 violations on Darlene's own property, all documented, all cross-referenced, all real. Her decorative shutters were the wrong shade of green. Her mailbox post was non-standard. Her recycling bins were visible from the street on non-collection days, a violation she had personally pushed into the rules 2 years prior. The board voted not to pursue them. 4-1, again. Boyd was the one. That vote is in the minutes. Permanently. Constance added it to our selective enforcement file, which at this point was thick enough to use as a doorstop. She also added something else. A note from her first pass through those HOA financials. Something about a vendor contract. Something that smelled worse than diesel and rust. She was almost ready to tell me what she'd found. Almost. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was in the lot, writing up dispatch notes, when Constance said 4 words that I still think about. "Garrett, sit down first." The HOA financials told a story. It started with a vendor line item, property compliance and enforcement services, that appeared first in the records from 3 years ago, shortly after Darlene took over as president. The vendor's name? Pinebrook Compliance, LLC. Constance had run the LLC through the Tennessee Secretary of State's Business Registry. Pinebrook Compliance, LLC was formed 16 days after Darlene was elected HOA president. Its registered agent? A paralegal at a small Murfreesboro law firm. Its sole member, per the operating agreement obtained through a public records request, Darlene R. Fitch. The HOA had been paying Darlene's own company, her own LLC, to perform compliance monitoring services. Over 3 years, the payments totaled $41,800, approved each time by a board that she chaired and a majority that she controlled. That is called self-dealing. In the context of a nonprofit HOA, it may rise to the level of breach of fiduciary duty and potentially fraud. Under Tennessee's nonprofit statutes, board members owe a duty of loyalty to the organization, meaning they cannot use their position to financially benefit themselves at the organization's expense without full disclosure and approval by disinterested parties. There had been no disclosure. There had been no disinterested vote. But here's the kicker, the detail that made Constance's voice go quiet on the phone. Among the services Pinebrook Compliance LLC had been paid for, towing coordination and vehicle removal oversight. The HOA, when it needed vehicles towed, had been routing those calls through Darlene's LLC, which took a coordination fee and then subcontracted to actual towing companies. Darlene had been skimming a middleman fee off every tow the neighborhood ordered, including, as it turned out, the company they'd most recently contracted with for the overnight parking enforcement sweep. That company was on a rotating preferred vendor list. The most recent preferred vendor, selected by Darlene, approved by her board majority, in a process that Constance described as suspicious on its face, was a small operation called ClearPath Towing. ClearPath Towing is a 3-truck outfit that operates out of a leased bay in an industrial park off New Salem Highway. They're a fine little business, nothing wrong with them, but they subcontract overflow work, nights and weekends, big jobs they can't handle alone, to a larger regional provider. That regional provider, the one ClearPath calls when they need backup, you already know, Tillman Brothers Towing. So when Darlene's board authorized an overnight enforcement sweep of the neighborhood, they called ClearPath. ClearPath, facing a 16-vehicle job overnight on a Friday, far more than their 3 trucks could handle, called their overflow provider. The dispatcher on duty, a college kid named Devin who works our weekend shift, accepted the job and sent out 4 trucks. Those trucks towed 16 vehicles from Pinebrook Estates, including 4 belonging to me and my family. My company, my trucks, towing my own cars, on a job authorized by a board trying to run me out of the neighborhood. HOA board members who route payments to personally owned LLCs without disclosure engage in self-dealing, which can constitute breach of fiduciary duty and expose the individual to personal liability, not just the HOA entity. I stayed on the phone with Constance for a long time after that. When I finally hung up, I walked back into the shop, and I laughed until my eyes watered. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes it arrives in a manila envelope full of financial records you had to sue to get. And it's better than anything you could have planned. You want to know what strategy looks like? It doesn't look like revenge. Revenge is hot and fast, and usually blows up in your face. Strategy is cold, patient, and organized. It looks like a whiteboard in the back office of a towing company at 10 p.m., with 3 people drinking bad coffee, building something solid. Constance. Boyd Kellerman, the dissenting board member who'd been waiting for this moment. And me. We had 4 tools in our kit: legal, financial, procedural, and, the one I was most careful about, public. The legal piece. Constance was preparing 2 simultaneous filings. The first was a motion to void all fines and the existing lien, based on the procedural defects in the CC and R amendment and the documented pattern of selective enforcement. The second was a derivative action on behalf of HOA members, meaning we were suing the HOA board in the HOA's own interest to recover the $41,800 in self-dealing payments Darlene had routed to her LLC. Derivative actions are a specific legal mechanism that allows members of a nonprofit or corporation to sue its leadership for misusing organization funds when the organization itself won't act. Tennessee courts have upheld these in HOA contexts. Legal takeaway. A derivative lawsuit allows individual HOA members to sue on behalf of the HOA to recover funds misused by board members, even when the board won't police itself. The financial piece. Boyd, as a sitting board member with access to the HOA's operating accounts, formally requested that the HOA's accountant be engaged to perform a forensic review of all vendor payments for the past 4 years. He made this request in writing, copied to every board member, creating a paper trail. Darlene could refuse, but refusing, in writing, would look exactly as bad as it was. She refused, in writing. Boyd's letter, her refusal, and the supporting documentation went to the Tennessee Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division, which oversees nonprofit organizations, and to the IRS Form 990 Reporting Compliance Unit. HOAs that file, as nonprofits are required to disclose related party transactions. Pinebrook Estates had not disclosed a penny of Darlene's LLC payments in their 990 filings. HOAs organized as nonprofits must disclose related party transactions on IRS Form 990. Failure to do so can trigger IRS audit and penalties, and the forms are public record. The procedural piece was Boyd's specialty. He'd spent 30 years as a firefighter, which means he spent 30 years learning exactly how institutions protect themselves through procedure, and exactly how that procedure can be weaponized in return. He reviewed the Pinebrook bylaws line by line, and found what we'd been looking for: a provision allowing for a special recall election of board officers if 30% of the membership signed a petition. 42 homes. 30% was 13 households. Boyd went door to door. He is a big, quiet man with a gray mustache and a way of talking to neighbors that makes them feel like he's letting them in on something important, because he is. Within 10 days, he had 19 signatures, nearly half the neighborhood. The physical piece, and this is the one that still makes me grin, was the dispatch logs. Remember Devin, the weekend dispatcher who accepted the ClearPath overflow job? Good kid, thorough. He logs everything: time of call, caller name, authorizing party, job details, number of vehicles, coordinates, and, this is the part Darlene never considered, the account to which the job gets billed. ClearPath doesn't have a corporate account with us. They're a subcontract relationship, which means their jobs get logged under a referral code that traces back to whoever brought them the original work. ClearPath's original work, in this case, came from Pinebrook Compliance LLC, Darlene's own company, as part of her towing coordination contract with the HOA, which means the paper trail looks like this. The HOA pays Darlene's LLC. Darlene's LLC pays ClearPath. ClearPath calls my company tows my cars. I have that paper trail, all of it, in my own records. We set the date. The HOA was required to hold its annual meeting in the second week of November, per the bylaws. It was a public meeting. Any Pinebrook homeowner could attend and address the board. Philippa at the Tribune already knew something was coming. I'd told her to keep her Thursday evening free. Boyd made sure the meeting was properly noticed and that a quorum would be present. The recall petition would be delivered at the meeting. The legal filings would drop the morning of. The forensic review request, the AG referral, the IRS complaint, all timed to land in the same 24-hour window, and I would be there. With my dispatch logs and my attorney, we were ready. There's a specific kind of panic that hits people who are used to running the room, when they realize for the first time that the room is no longer theirs. Darlene hit that panic about 10 days before the annual meeting, and it was not pretty. First came the smear campaign. She sent a neighborhood-wide email, subject line, "Concerns about our community," implying, without quite saying, that I had undisclosed conflicts of interest with the HOA's vendor relationships, and that there were questions worth asking about how Tillman Brothers Towing had come to service the neighborhood. It was slippery, careful language, designed to plant a seed without leaving fingerprints. What she didn't account for: half the neighborhood had already signed Boyd's petition. They'd heard the real story. They weren't seeds, they were witnesses, and several of them forwarded the email directly to Constance as additional evidence of harassment. Then came the legal threat. Darlene's personal attorney, not the HOA's attorney, her personal one, paid from her own pocket, which tells you something about how seriously she was taking this, sent a letter to Constance threatening a defamation suit if we continued to publicly misrepresent the board's financial management. The letter was long on bluster and short on specifics, which Constance described in her response as a document that appears designed to intimidate rather than inform. Constance's response was 4 paragraphs. The first acknowledged receipt. The second outlined our evidentiary record. The third noted that truthful statements of fact, supported by documentary evidence, cannot constitute defamation as a matter of law. The fourth paragraph was a single sentence. We look forward to seeing you at the November 14th annual meeting. Then Darlene tried to cancel the meeting. She sent a notice to homeowners, signed only by herself, not the full board, claiming the annual meeting was postponed pending a legal review. Boyd immediately responded in writing that a unilateral postponement by the board president without a full board vote was improper under the bylaws, that the 30-day notice requirement for the meeting had already been met, and that the meeting would proceed as scheduled. He copied every board member, every signatory on the recall petition, and the HOA's own corporate attorney, who, it turned out, had not been consulted about the postponement and was not pleased to learn about it this way. The HOA's attorney sent his own letter to the board. The meeting would proceed. Darlene made one more move. She reached out to ClearPath Towing, specifically to its owner, a guy named Terrence Boggs, who genuinely had no idea what he'd stepped into, and offered to renew their preferred vendor contract at a higher rate, apparently hoping to buy his silence, or at least his loyalty. Terrence called me the same afternoon. He'd worked with us for years and wasn't going to play middleman in someone else's lawsuit. He told Darlene he wasn't interested in renewing and let me know what she'd offered. I thanked him. I made a note of the call, and I passed it to Constance, who filed it under potential witness. 4 days before the meeting, Darlene sent one final letter to every homeowner in Pinebrook. It was, by any measure, a remarkable document. 3 pages of grievances, accusations, and revisionist history, dressed up in the language of protecting community standards. She claimed to have dramatically improved property values. She claimed the enforcement actions had been uniformly applied. She claimed the opposition was driven by personal animosity and a small group of troublemakers. She did not mention Pinebrook Compliance LLC. She did not mention the $41,800. She did not mention that her name was on the LLC's operating agreement. Boyd read the letter, set it down on his kitchen table, and called me. "She's scared," he said. "I know," I said. "You ready?" I thought about the 5 a.m. morning with the empty driveway. I thought about Marcus's face when he got that bumper sticker violation. I thought about Rhonda's concrete rabbit. I thought about 20 years of building something that nobody handed me. "Been ready," I said. The 72 hours before the meeting were the quietest stretch of the whole process, and that quiet had a specific texture, the coiled spring stillness of something about to release. Constance filed the 2 lawsuits on the morning of November 13th, the day before the meeting. The motion to void the fines and lien was filed in Rutherford County Circuit Court. The derivative action against Darlene personally, seeking recovery of the $41,800 plus legal costs, was filed simultaneously. Both filings were public record by noon. Philippa Strand, who had been patiently waiting, published her second article that same afternoon. New lawsuits target Pinebrook Estates board president over alleged self-dealing. She had reviewed the court filings, the LLC registration, and the partial financial records we'd provided. The article was careful, factual, sourced. By evening, it had been picked up by the Tennessean's regional desk and shared over 1,000 times. Boyd had contacted 2 other Rutherford County HOA advocacy groups, organizations that existed specifically to help homeowners navigate HOA disputes, and invited their representatives to attend the meeting as observers. He also notified the Murfreesboro chapter of the NAACP, given the Fair Housing Act complaint. Their legal observer confirmed attendance. I spent the day before the meeting not strategizing. There was nothing left to strategize. I drove my route. I checked in on the shop. I had dinner with Rhonda and Marcus and my daughter Tamara, who is 16, and had been watching all of this with the sharp, quiet attention of someone who is building her own understanding of how the world works. She asked me at the table, "Do you think she's going to show up?" "I think she has to," I said. Tamara nodded, chewing, thinking. "Good," she said. Meanwhile, Darlene spent that same day making the worst decision available to her. She called an emergency board meeting the morning of November 14th, the morning of the annual meeting, and attempted to pass a resolution retroactively ratifying all payments to Pinebrook Compliance LLC. Let me explain why this was the equivalent of trying to unring a bell by ringing it louder. Under Tennessee nonprofit law, Retroactive ratification of a self-dealing transaction requires, at minimum, full disclosure to all members, a vote of disinterested board members, and a determination that the transaction was fair to the organization. Darlene's morning board meeting had none of these elements. Boyd refused to participate, walked out, and sent a text to Constance from the parking lot. She just tried to ratify it. No quorum. I walked. You'll want this for the record. Constance added it to the record. The attempted ratification, far from insulating Darlene, had actually made things worse. It demonstrated awareness that the payments were problematic, which undercut any argument that she'd acted in good faith. By the time the sun went down on November 13th, the legal filings were in, the newspaper articles were running, the Allied observers had confirmed attendance, and the recall petition, 19 signatures, nearly half the neighborhood, was in Boyd's jacket pocket, ready to be delivered. I ironed my shirt, polished my boots, went to bed. You know how some nights you sleep better than you have in months? When something that's been sitting on your chest for so long finally has a date and a time and a room, and your body just exhales? That was that night. The Pinebrook Estates annual meeting is held in the community room of the neighborhood's amenity center, a carpeted, fluorescent-lit room with folding chairs that seats maybe 60 people comfortably. By 6:45 p.m., and 15 minutes before the meeting's scheduled start, every chair was taken. People were standing along the walls. I counted at least 30 of the 42 Pinebrook homeowners present. 2 representatives from HOA advocacy groups sat near the back with legal pads. The NAACP legal observer sat near the door. Philippa Strand had a seat in the second row, recorder on the table. The smell of the room was old carpet and too many people, and the particular anxiety that gathers in small spaces when something is about to happen. The folding chairs creaked whenever anyone shifted. You could feel it, that collective held breath. Darlene arrived at 6:52, flanked by 2 of her board loyalists. She wore a blazer. She carried a binder. She had the look of someone who had told themselves, one too many times in the mirror that morning, that they were in control of this. She saw the room. She saw Boyd. She saw Constance, seated beside me in the third row. She saw the legal observer and the advocacy group representatives. She saw Philippa's recorder on the table, and she sat down and opened her binder like none of it was happening. The meeting was called to order at 7:02. Darlene moved through the standard agenda items with the rigid efficiency of someone hoping to run out the clock. Treasurer's report, read by a board member, not an independent accountant, noted. Old business, new business. She was moving fast, too fast. Boyd raised his hand. Point of order. Under the bylaws, any homeowner in good standing could raise a point of order during new business. Boyd was in good standing. He stood up, put on his reading glasses, and read the recall petition into the record. Calmly, clearly, name by name. 19 signatures. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Darlene said, "This petition will be reviewed by legal counsel before." Per Article 6, Section 3 of the Pinebrook bylaws, Boyd said, without raising his voice, a petition signed by 30% or more of the membership triggers a mandatory special election within 30 days. It doesn't require board approval or legal review. It's self-executing. He set the petition on the table in front of her. That's 19 out of 42. The threshold is 13. Silence, the kind that has weight. Then I stood up. I'm not a dramatic person. I didn't rehearse a speech. I walked to the front of the room and I put 3 things on the table, side by side. A copy of the Tennessee Secretary of State's record for Pinebrook Compliance, LLC, showing Darlene as sole member. A copy of the HOA's bank records showing $41,800 in payments to that LLC. And a copy of my company's dispatch log showing the chain from the HOA's authorization to ClearPath to Tillman Brothers to my own driveway. "My name is Garrett Tillman," I said. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 11 years. 3 weeks ago, your board authorized a towing sweep that removed 4 vehicles from my property. The job was subcontracted, through this board president's personal LLC, to a company that contracted my company to execute it. I own the towing company that towed my own cars. On a job that was paid for, in part, with money this board secretly funneled to a company this president owns. I picked up the dispatch log. I have every record. My attorney has filed 2 lawsuits. The Tennessee Attorney General's Office and the IRS have both received formal complaints about the HOA's undisclosed related party transactions. And tonight, this neighborhood has submitted a valid recall petition. I looked at Darlene. She was looking at her binder. I didn't come here for an apology, I said. I came here for the record. The room erupted, not in chaos, in the specific kind of noise that happens when 40 people have been holding something in for a long time and all let it out at once. Questions, statements, neighbors talking over each other. Philippa was writing. The legal observer was writing. Darlene's 2 board loyalists were looking at each other like they were trying to figure out when exactly they'd gotten on this train. Darlene stood up. She said, "This meeting is adjourned." Boyd, still standing, said quietly, "You don't have the authority to adjourn over a point of order in new business. Anyone who believes that, read Article 5. He looked around the room. Does anyone move to continue? 30 voices said yes. Darlene walked out. Her 2 board allies followed, a few steps behind, like punctuation marks nobody needed. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes. Boyd was elected interim board president by acclamation. A timeline for the special recall election was set. A motion to engage an independent auditor was passed unanimously. Outside, in the parking lot, the air smelled like November, cold and clean, and like something finally ending. Here's how the dominoes fell, and they fell fast. Within 2 weeks of the annual meeting, Darlene resigned from the HOA board. The resignation was sent by email, no explanation, late on a Sunday night. The recall election, now moot for her seat, proceeded for the other board positions. 3 new members were elected, including a retired school librarian named Dorothea Birch, who had been quietly furious about the HOA's management for 2 years and now had a mandate to fix it. The circuit court, reviewing Constance's motion, voided the lien on my property and all associated fines, finding that the CC&R amendment had been passed without proper quorum and that the enforcement pattern demonstrated sufficient evidence of selective application to make the fines legally unenforceable. The court also awarded attorney's fees to be paid by the HOA. That hurt them. Good. The derivative lawsuit, the one seeking recovery of the $41,800, was settled out of court 4 months later. The settlement terms are confidential, but I can tell you that the HOA's reserve fund was materially improved as a result, and that Pinebrook Compliance LLC was dissolved within 30 days of the settlement. Darlene did not admit wrongdoing. Of course she didn't, but the money came back. The IRS complaint regarding the undisclosed 990 transactions is, as of this telling, still under review. These things move slowly. The Tennessee AG's office conducted a preliminary inquiry and closed it without action, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent, which is the prosecutorial bar, not the civil one, and Constance reminds me there's a difference. We're watching. The Fair Housing Act complaint with the THRC reached a mediation agreement. The HOA adopted a formal anti-discrimination enforcement policy, required all board members to complete fair housing training, and engaged an independent third-party monitor for violations processing for a period of 2 years. It's not a verdict, it's not a headline, but it changes something structural, and structural change is what outlasts the drama. The thing I think about most, though, is the neighborhood. Because here's what I learned. Darlene had not created a community that agreed with her. She'd created a community that was too tired or too scared to say no. When Boyd went door to door with that petition, what he found mostly was relief. Neighbor after neighbor saying, finally, someone is doing something. The community had been there the whole time. It just needed a door knocked on. In the spring following all of this, Pinebrook Estates held its first ever Community Improvement Day, organized by the new board, attended by 31 households, and focused on fixing real issues, repainting the amenity center, repairing the walking path, planting a pollinator garden at the entrance that Rhonda helped design. We grilled out. It was a real neighborhood for maybe the first time I could remember. Tillman Brothers Towing, by the way, is doing just fine. We added 2 trucks this year. Devin, the weekend dispatcher who inadvertently logged the job that started all of this, got a raise. Marcus finished his associate's degree. He's starting a bachelor's in the fall. The bumper sticker is still on his car. And we started something new, the Tillman Family Trades Scholarship, funded by a portion of Tillman Brothers' annual profit, awarded annually to a graduating Rutherford County senior pursuing a career in the skilled trades: welding, electrical, HVAC, auto mechanics, diesel tech. The first recipient was a kid named Sawyer from Smyrna, who wants to open his own shop someday. I shook his hand at the ceremony and I thought, this is why you don't fold. Not because of the lawsuit, not because of the HOA, because somewhere down the road, the fact that you stood your ground means that somebody else gets a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. That's the real win.